This is the fourth solve with the average. Yihang already has a 4.32, a 4.76, and a 4.49. All he needs is a 5.33 for a world record average. And he beats it by a mile. With 4 sub 5 solves in a row, his last solve doesn't even matter. He already locked in a 4.75 world record average. Yihang Wang was the fastest cuber in the world. Then strange things started happening. His average suddenly disappeared from the site. Then everyone's results suddenly disappeared. What was going on? There was a time where thousands of results were deleted from Vietnamese competitions in the past few years. Is something like that happening? No. It was instead this one word. A misscramble. We'll get back to this story later as it gets really intense. But first off, what is a misscramble? It's when a competitor gets a scrambled cube that does not match the computer-generated scramble intended for that solve. There are 3 main types of misscrambles. First is when the scramble given is the correct scramble, but for a different solve. For example, if someone got the 3rd scramble for their 2nd solve, that would be a misscramble. Usually this is pretty obvious because at some point, you'll get the same scramble twice. While this is a mess, it doesn't cause as many issues. The next type of misscramble is where a scrambler purposely makes the scramble different from the intended scramble. Maybe by not even following the scramble, or making it easier on purpose. The final type of misscramble is the most common probably, when the scrambler follows the correct scramble, but makes a mistake or misses a few moves, which makes the scramble close to correct, maybe a move off, but obviously not exact. So, when you get a misscramble, what happens? Do you get an extra, or is it a DNF? Or should there be no penalty? Well, it depends, and to find out whether a solve is an extra, a DNF, or if it's fine, we have to go through history to look at the precedent for misscrambles. One of the earliest misscramble controversies I remember is this solve right here. Felix Zemdeg's 6.88 one-handed single, which beat the last record by a lot. After the solve, because it was a world record, the delegate asked Felix to reconstruct this solve, but Felix was just not able to. Regardless, he did not get an extra. After the competition ended, from looking at the video, it turned out the scramble was wrong. One move in the scramble was an R instead of an R prime, so his world record was essentially on a misscramble. There is a lot of debate on whether the solve should count. After a lot of discussion from the WCA, it was decided that this solve would count. There were a few reasons for this. First off, obviously an extra wasn't given, so they had no solve to replace this solve with. And finally, when looking at the scramble, it wasn't that much of a change. Both the actual scramble and the misscramble were optimal 18 moves, which is the exact same. And the optimal cross is also pretty similar between the 2 scrambles. The real scramble was 4 moves optimal, and the misscramble was 3 move optimal. Because of all these factors, it was decided that this solve would count. And it stayed the world record for a really long time. Just a few months later, the 3x3 world record holder at that time, Colin Burns, got this scramble, and beat his own 5.25 world record with a 5.21. Just read the description. I didn't get excited because I was certain during inspection that it was a blatant misscramble that wouldn't count. So how did he know it was a misscramble? Well, we can look at the scramble itself. It just looks way too easy. Huge blocks everywhere, a 2-move double X cross, and a free pair after that. It's a bit too good to be true. And it was. Turns out the scramble was purposely set up by a scrambler to make it a lot easier than the actual scramble. After investigation, the WCA posted this. Dear community, at these 2 competitions, a competitor intentionally manipulated several scrambles in order to make them easier. Some scrambles were noticed at the time and replaced with extra solves, while others were only found during this investigation and will now be changed to a DNF. As a result, that competitor was banned from WCA competitions for 18 months, which shows how seriously the WCA takes misscrambles, especially those done intentionally. But this didn't change anything. Just a few years later, Max Park was going for Felix's 6.88 one-handed single that's still standing after several years, and he gets this solve. Just like Colin Burns, he immediately says misscramble.
Wow. Misscramble, right?
So how does he know? Well, again, it's because the scramble is way too good to be true. Here's the actual solution, and as you can see, it's pretty ridiculous. It's only 25 moves, every pair is free, and then a PLL skip. Just way too good to be true again. When comparing the scramble with the actual scramble, there were just no similarities. The only way this scramble was given was if it was deliberately made easy by the scrambler. What's even crazier is Max got another chance of this world record just a few months later at US Nationals. This is the solve he got. With a single of 6.44, did he finally get the record? Well, no. Turns out this is a misscramble as well. So how is this a misscramble? It's at US Nationals, so the staff should be properly trained. Comparing the scramble he got with the actual scramble, it was only off by 1 move, towards the end of the scramble. Because there was staff for this competition, it's unlikely that they scrambled the cube wrong. More likely was the cube turned while bringing it to the station, which is unfortunate, but again, it is a misscramble. They found out during the competition, so they immediately gave an extra, and Max Park didn't get the world record. If you fast forward a few years, Timon actually got the 3x3 world record average. However, when checking the scrambles, it turned out his fourth solve was a misscramble, and he had to do an extra attempt. And this extra attempt might be one of the most famous solves in recent history. Even with the misscramble being replaced by a new solve, he still gets world record, getting a time of 4.56 and getting a world record average of 4.86. A rare case where the misscramble prevented a world record, but the extra attempt clutched it. I can go on and on about misscrambles and how they ruined plenty of world records, continental records, national records, or even personal records. It's actually a lot more common than you might think. But in the past few weeks, we've seen two huge misscrambles by two of the best Rubik's Cube solvers in the world, Ruihang and Yihang Wang. At Singapore Championship 2023, Ruihang got a 3.86 single, but as I mentioned in my last video, it was a misscramble. The misscramble was only found after the competition, so he was never given an extra. So should this scramble count? This is pretty similar with the case of Felix, so we had to investigate the scramble. When comparing a misscramble to the actual scramble, it's a bit different than the Felix situation. Instead of one move being wrong, actually 3 moves were added onto the end, which is very strange. You don't just accidentally do 3 moves at the end. What's even more strange is those 3 moves just so happen to solve the edge for an X cross. So the chance that these 3 moves were an accident or done in transportation is just so unlikely. And probably these 3 moves were done intentionally to help make the scramble easier. So the 3.86 I just covered in my last video is now a DNF. And that wasn't the only solve that was DNF'd. Yifan's Asian record blindfolded single was also DNF'd. As it turned out, the scramble seemed to be a lot easier, and also was intentional. What was going on in this competition? But now onto the more controversial one, with Yihang Wang, just this past weekend. It was found that his second solve was a misscramble, which was one of the 4 second solves, which means it definitely affected the world record average. He had to get an extra, and that extra had to be pretty fast to hold on to the world record average, similar to Timon's case. But he didn't do the extra scramble. Not yet, at least. I was on stream waiting hours just to see what he gets on the misscramble to see if this is a world record average. But he just never did the solve. He was even competing in the next event, 4x4, and still didn't do the extra. What was going on? Turns out there was a lot more drama behind the scenes. Yihang and his mom were obviously pretty upset with the misscramble, especially made in a post by his mom right here. She complained how misscrambles rarely happen in China, and now in Singapore and Vietnam, there's so many misscrambles. She also mentioned how Yihang broke the world record already in the first 4 solves. And obviously his last solve didn't matter. But if he knew there was a misscramble, that last solve would have definitely mattered. And he might have solved differently then. However, he only knew of the misscramble after the whole average was finished, which was pretty unfair. But even worse was the misscramble itself. Let me show you why. Now Yihang only solves on white cross. Keep that in mind. The misscramble of this solve was only off by 1 move. It was supposed to be D prime, but it was executed as D, which turns the yellow side. Because it only turns the yellow side, it really doesn't change the solve at all. Since the whole white F12 was unaffected, the solution for F12, for his misscramble and for the actual scramble would be the exact same. And so would the OLO and PLO. The only difference between the misscramble and the actual scramble is the AUF. So literally just 1 move at the end. So isn't this scramble close enough? It was clearly an accident, and it literally gave him no competitive advantage. But after those hours, it was decided that he should get an extra. He did the extra and got a 6.21. Meaning this is no longer a world record. As of right now, the extra solve still stands, and his average is not a world record. However, I do believe the WCA is still discussing whether this should count or not. So, misscrambles. They cause so many world record fails, and have been really frustrating for competitors and fans alike. So what can be done? I'm not a delegate, I'm just a normal cuber, but here's my thoughts. First off, as shown in this video, misscrambles are much more important for faster cubers than slower cubers. Obviously, no one should get a misscramble, but if we can prevent a few, they should definitely be for top solvers, to avoid any of these situations. So I think everyone with record capability should have their scrambles double and triple checked. An idea is to put a star next to their scorecard to tell the scramblers to make very sure that this scramble is correct. Preferably, if there are 2 scramblers, maybe have both scramblers verify the scramble, if one set of eyes is not enough. Also, obviously, have good scramblers at the scrambling table. There shouldn't be new competitors there, those who don't know the rules or give away easy scrambles. It should be cubing veterans who understand how important scrambling correctly is. And again, scrambling is difficult. When you're scrambling hundreds and hundreds of cubes, it's very easy to miss scramble on just one of them. For that reason, I don't want anyone to go out and try to find these scramblers and give them hate, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to help the competition. But this job is very important, and we need to have the most experienced cubers perform this job. So thanks for watching this video, and always check the scramble.